Okay, we'll get going on session 5, the penultimate session today, and this is entitled Using and Sharing MDA Data. We're very honoured to and privileged to be moderated today by Ambassador Mashfee Binte Shams, and on the panel coming in remotely, so we can share him remotely, Mr. John Stawpert from the International Chamber of Shipping, and Mr. Felipe Ramos, who's from the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime. So we'll bring up Mr. Stawpert shortly, and I'll now hand over to Ambassador to start the moderation.
Good afternoon, Assalamu alaikum, distinguished guests, panelists, experts, scholars. It's wonderful to be here, and I would like to thank the organizers, BIMRAD and ANU, for inviting me to participate in this very extremely useful workshop. If I may be honest, I'm feeling a little bit like a fish out of water because I believe I'm the only one who has very little technical knowledge about this. I'm a retired diplomat. I worked in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Bangladesh, retired as secretary, and then worked for 2 years as the rector, the principal of the training institute, Diplomatic Training Institute, which we call the Foreign Service Academy. And for some reason, David thought that I could be useful here. So we have had very useful sessions in the morning and in the afternoon. The last 2 sessions were really very interesting for me. And now we are turning to the shipping industry. Indeed, the Indian Ocean littoral states have been very connected, historically connected, through shipping and bringing not only goods, trading, but also bringing in people, values, culture, religion, languages, ideas. So the shipping linkages and the connectivity has been there. But of course, the world today is much more complex than it used to be, and the shipping industry has modernized. And in this session, we will be talking about how the shipping industry is using MDA for data sharing and for giving a legal basis to it. And we have 2 very distinguished panelists, as our MC has already informed. So we have John Stawpert, who is joining us virtually. He's from the International Chamber of Shipping, and we have Mr. Felipe Ramos from the UNODC. Since time is short, without any delay, let me hand over the floor to Mr. John Stawpert to take us through the first part of the discussion. Thank you. John, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Stawpert. I'm the head of the Marine Department at the International Chamber of Shipping. I've been there for over 23 years now, and in that time have held the security brief. So I have, I hope, sufficient experience of MDA to be able today to give you a brief introduction to how we share information with key partners to develop MDA, and how that helps us secure the sea lanes and play our part in ensuring that world trade continues to flow securely and safely. A brief introduction as to what ICS is. We were established in 1921 following the first Safety at Sea conference, which followed on from the Titanic disaster in 1912. We represent national ship owner associations around the world, so we're not a direct entry organisation. We don't represent companies directly. We're an agglomeration of national associations. We're headquartered in London, predominantly because that's where the International Maritime Organisation is located. And we have around 52 members representing roughly 80% of the world's merchant fleet, and we cover all sectors. That is the membership of the first ever ICS conference. I'm pleased to say we're slightly more diverse these days than we were back then. And this is our mission, to advocate for the industry on all issues pertaining to maritime. We lobby governments at IMO to ensure that regulation is proportionate to the needs of the industry, and we provide technical guidance to shipping companies and seafarers to ensure that they can go about their business safely in an environmentally sound way. So, as I say, the purpose of me presenting today is to give you an idea of how we interact with reporting centres, predominantly military reporting centres, how that has evolved, what use we put to it, and how we can contribute to navies and states' maritime domain awareness in areas where it's needed. There is quite a long history of industry-military cooperation. If we go back to the Cold War, there was NCAGS, which was naval control of shipping, which was largely focused on sea lift, moving expeditionary forces around the world and using merchant shipping for that. UKMTO in Dubai was established in the 1990s to help coordinate and advise shipping in the Gulf region during the various conflicts that occurred in that area. But the big driver and the big change in how we cooperate with military reporting centres, how we provide them with data as to where our ships are and what they're doing, and how they feed back to us, was the Somali piracy crisis from 2008 to around 2013. And that saw an upscaling of UKMTO. It saw the deployment of NATO and European assets to the region, along with a great many non-aligned states, independent deployers from Asia and Asia Pacific specifically. And it saw the establishment of a new reporting centre called MSC HOA, which was a Maritime Security Centre for the Horn of Africa, which was a European initiative. Even though there were precedents for reporting and cooperation in this way, this really turbocharged how we do things, and the models that I'll describe today essentially all stem from that experience and the architecture that needed to be established in that region to combat the activity of Somali pirates. And notwithstanding an incident last week, which I'll come on to later on, it has been a key contributor to suppressing those pirate gangs. There are some fundamental principles of reporting and providing information to navies and governments. The first one is that there needs to be a clear purpose for the reporting. There is occasionally an assumption that shipping will just provide information to any reporting centre simply because it's a nice thing to do. There has to be a clear purpose, there has to be a clear drive for these centres and an output. Now normally that will be providing security information back to shipping. Another key aspect of reporting an MDA is that the source must be trusted. Obviously, at the time of Somali piracy, things were a lot simpler because the aggressor was clearly identified, was a non-state actor, it was criminal gangs. We're now in a much more complicated security situation globally, and whether a company provides data to a reporting centre will depend greatly on whether they trust that centre to protect the information and to ensure that their commercial interests in particular, but also the security interests of the ship and crew are protected through that exchange. A single point of contact, well, the 999 number, or 911 if we're speaking in American terms, is also vital. Masters on board ships are incredibly busy people, and so are their ship security officers. Company security officers may be overseeing a fleet of 100 ships. If we enter a theatre where there are 15 different reporting centres and we're expected to report to every single one of them, that's a huge burden on these people. So we just want that one point of contact that we can feed into, that will feed back to us, and that we can trust. Now, obviously, in some regions, and I'll talk at length about the Indian Ocean, we do find multiple reporting mechanisms, and in those circumstances, we still need that single point of contact and a means by which those centres can talk to one another and share information in a secure way. Again, they all need to be easy to use, and finally, there has to be a quid pro quo. Providing data needs to have a product back to the industry. Usually, as I say, this will be security information. It will be information or data that we can use to secure our ships, to threat assess and risk assess, and to make sure that a voyage through a transit, through an area of security risk is safe. There are a number of existing systems out there at the moment which are utilised by the shipping industry and provide benefits both to us and back to the governments and navies that provide them. I've mentioned the Western Indian Ocean already. That system has been mirrored in West Africa, where we've faced problems with Gulf of Guinea pirates through the provision of the MDA GOG service, which is jointly run by the UK and France. There's also the Mediterranean Voluntary Reporting Scheme, which is run by NATO, and which I think has seen an uptick in data since destabilisations in the Middle East and also North Africa. We have the IFC Singapore, which is a very, very reliable centre. And we also have in that same theatre RECAP, which is committed to combating piracy. So there are a huge number of existing systems out there. What is interesting is that we don't have blanket coverage globally. And one of the reasons for that is that they have to provide value, and there has to be a reason for them to exist. In saying that, as the security picture gets more complicated around the world, I think we will see more reporting spring up, because it's in the interests of governments to understand what is happening on the surface but also below their oceans, and shipping can contribute significantly to developing that wide picture. We'll take a look at the Red Sea and the Western Indian Ocean and the mechanism that we have in this region. This, as I say, was stood up to combat Somali piracy back in the early 2000s, and I would say that of all the systems out there, this is the gold standard. This is what provides the most value to industry. It's the one that ship owners understand, that crews understand, and that we can demonstrate value from. And that's largely because this is an incredibly unstable patch of water where we've seen problems that we didn't expect to encounter, say, at the start of the century. So we have the United Kingdom's UK MTO, we have MSC IO, that's the successor to MSC HOA, and we have the Joint Maritime Information Centre, which is run out of Bahrain. Essentially, these are three separate systems, and that has presented some problems, particularly at the start of the Red Sea crisis, where we didn't know who to report to. Thankfully, those missions in the region have worked together, and they've helped develop a standardised format and architecture to ensure that whoever you report to, it's shared with the other two centres, and you will only get one stream back to industry from reporting in. There is a standardised format for reporting from ships, and all three centres are trusted, largely because we know that if there is an incident, we will get a response of some kind. It does provide maritime domain awareness back to industry, and I'll give an example of that at the end of the presentation. And it coordinates in real time and provides a response whenever an incident occurs. And this is extremely important. It's a lesson we've learned from the experience of piracy, but more recently the Red Sea crisis with the Houthi attacks against shipping. And that really is valuable to vessels, either those that are transiting through the region or which are considering transiting, because the security threats we face in those waters are now incredibly complex due to the evolving targeting criteria that the Houthis use. No voyage is ever easy. There are challenges that we face in reporting and establishing maritime domain awareness. Some of these we have overcome, some are still ongoing. One that perhaps one wouldn't expect to face is the existence of a common lexicon for reporting incidents. You would think that an armed robber in one part of the world is very similar to an armed robber in another part of the world, that a pirate is a pirate, that one form of attack will be described in the same way, whether it's in the Black Sea or whether it's in the Red Sea. However, because of political pressures, we've struggled to establish a single lexicon and reporting format to what are often very similar issues. And this causes problems because it means that if one was transiting, say, from Korea through to Europe, transiting the Somme and then through the Indian Ocean, through Suez, you might find that you're reporting on in three different languages effectively, and that causes problems. It increases the burden on the crew, and ultimately it works against developing a common wide picture. There are competing platforms in different geographical areas. This again can present problems for ships. They don't know who to report to in the first instance, or if they've reported to both, they get bombarded with information and calls from different centres and different commands. This does not help us secure the sea lanes, and there have been incidents where ships were under attack in the Red Sea and were being called by 3 or 4 different commands asking what was going on at the same time. That is not a situation that helps develop understanding of the security picture in any one region. Trust and confidentiality, as I mentioned before, are a key challenge. In particular, where there are multiple platforms in a region, companies will be wary about where information is going. So it's necessary in any reporting architecture to make it clear what information flows are and where information is going and how it is treated. And that's one of the lessons we've learned from the Indian Ocean in developing the trusted architecture we have there, because it could be a situation, and we've seen this in debates at IMO when mandatory reporting has been proposed, that a ship reports to a state and then that ship's data is shared with an adversary of that ship's flag state. And again, we must be very wary about securing that flow of information. A more prosaic challenge, but one that we face constantly, is changes in military command and the personnel in the centres that we're feeding information to. Shipping and the military do not necessarily understand one another very well. It's better than when I started in the industry, but there are still challenges. And so, to give an example, a admiral may think that it's perfectly acceptable to turn around and tell a ship to turn off their AIS, and then will not understand that actually that's the master's prerogative, and masters do not take commands from admirals. And so we can face standoffs and challenges in that way. Similarly, certain behaviours that we as industry might think are everyday can be very, very confusing to military commands who don't understand the difference between the merchant marine and the naval marine. And finally, and I think this is a key point, is expectation management. So there is an assumption that ships' crews are the eyes and ears on the waves and can provide detailed intelligence effectively on what behaviour they're witnessing, and in particular if they're seeing anything out of the normal. But the ship could be trading internationally, and a ship's crew may only go through one particular region that a state is interested in, perhaps once every 3 or 5 years. So they won't be as aware of what odd behaviour looks like on the high seas as is necessarily assumed. And in that, it's our role as an association and with our partner associations to manage those expectations and to say that, in fact, okay, you'll get the lat and long of where a ship is, they'll provide their details, you'll get their flag details, the contacts for their CSO, but meaningful intelligence may be thin on the ground unless you ask for specific details. And again, this is something that we've developed successfully in the Indian Ocean, more so than in other regions such as the Mediterranean, where the commands know now, A, through MDA, what typical behaviour is and what a pattern of life is, but also what ships can realistically observe and provide back to them. And through UKMTO in particular, there's very, very good flows of information beyond what is the standard. There are a lot of benefits to reporting and developing maritime domain awareness. Yes?
Could you wrap up very quickly?
Yeah, I've got 2 more slides, I think.
Okay.
From our point, we get threat awareness and mitigation. We get the response we are able to avoid, and we get reassurances. For the military, they're able to coordinate their assets. They have operational agility, and they understand the pattern of life, as I said. And this incident, just quickly, is an example of how it works. So the Hellas Aphrodite was boarded on the 7th of November by Pirate Action Group. UKMTO sent out nav warns to nearby vessels within 50 nautical miles of that group. There was real-time threat information, the crew was unharmed, and the mothership was tracked. And if you looked at the plotting of the vessels in the area while that was going on, there was a big hole around where that mothership was, and it was an example of how this works in real time. I'm sorry for overrunning slightly. If you follow that QR code, that will give you access to our publications page, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very informative and substantive subject. It's very difficult to put it talk all about it in such a short time. So thank you very much, John. I'm sure our audience will have lots of questions for you. So let me now turn to the second part of our presentation. So may I ask Mr. Felipe Ramos from UNODC to share his insights on how the maritime domain awareness can benefit from UNODC's experience. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Felipe Ramos. I'm the head of UNODC in Bangladesh. It's with a great pleasure that I'm coming here today on behalf of UNODC, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, to speak about the work of the Global Maritime Crime Program, UNODC GMCP. In special, our work to develop the capabilities of member states on maritime domain awareness to help them achieve what we call legal finish. Thank you, Dr. David Brewster, the National Security College, BIMRAD, the government of Bangladesh, the government of Australia, and the Bangladesh Navy for this invitation. GMCP stands for Global Maritime Crime Program. GMCP is the largest UNODC program in the world. We have physical presence. We have officers implementing our program in over 42 countries, and we implement activities in over 100 countries. The main objective of GMCP is to strengthen the capacities of member states to counter organized crime within the maritime domain through support to the entire criminal justice system. This means that we work with member states to improve capabilities with law enforcement, detection, interdiction, investigation, prosecution, detention, and on top of all that regional cooperation. So some key concepts. As part of our work, we work with member countries to ensure legal finish. What's legal finish? Legal finish refers to the process of ensuring that maritime interdiction or enforcement actions are carried out in accordance with applicable national and international law. In other words, it's a bridge between detection, interdiction, and prosecution. We had a few examples here today. Lieutenant Commander Booth, for example, he was explaining how difficult it is, even if when we act upon intelligence, how difficult it is to have an arrest. So when we are talking about legal fishing, we are talking about actually achieving arrests and conviction of people suspected in maritime crime. Especially in the maritime domain, achieving legal finish can be very complicated. So that was also one very good example. Commodore from the Bangladesh Navy, from the Information Freedom Center, he explained. So it was you, sir. I'm taking your example with your permission. So you're talking about a human trafficking case that was involving at least 5 countries. So when law enforcement happens across 5 jurisdictions, this becomes much more complicated. We are talking about 5 legal frameworks. We are talking about 5 law enforcement agencies at least cooperating together to investigate that case. That becomes much more complicated, and that also complicates achieving legal finish. The international framework, law framework of several also international tribunals also makes it much more challenging. One of the key elements of achieving jurisdiction, achieving legal finish in maritime crime is establishing jurisdiction. Differently from land-based crimes, where jurisdiction disputes is only about if it's the police in Dhaka Metropolitan Police or if it's the police department in Sylhet who will be investigating that case, when we are disputing jurisdiction in the maritime domain, we are challenging the entire rights of that state to enforce its law against this criminal activity. Jurisdiction is the legal right to enforce laws, investigate offenses, and prosecute crimes in a given space or a given vessel or person. We all know here that the legal rights of a state to enforce its law, according to the UN clause, it depends on the maritime zone. So the farther we go from our baseline, less rights the state will have to enforce its law, right? What happens is that when there is a robbery in Dhaka, for example, we can locate easily that crime. We can say that happens in row 3, house number 3, in Gulshan, for example, in Gulshan 1 or Gulshan 2. In the maritime domain, there is no address. So we have to establish jurisdiction to establish location. Okay? That is much more challenging. So MDA information can support that. If we have proof, if prosecution and investigation have proof where the crime took place, they also can prove jurisdiction. But there is another way how MDA-generated information or evidence, in this case, can support legal finish as well, which is creating probatory elements of criminal activity. Especially in criminal law, the standards of proof to prove someone guilty is much more stringent. That's a way to protect citizens against wrongful conviction. So we usually say that you need to prove someone guilty beyond reasonable doubt. So there should be no doubt that this person is guilty, so we can impute culpability against that person. These standards of proof, they usually happen at stages. So you see here, this pyramid is the pyramid of burdens of proof standards. So the higher we go in the pyramid, more proof, more evidence we have that this person is guilty. So MDA can also help investigators and prosecutors to bring the burden of proof, the proof standards, to the utmost level, to the highest level. Usually when we are talking, that has been repeated here many times, we are talking about actionable intelligence. We are talking about only about the first level of standards of proof. Okay, it's about reasonable suspicion. It's about probable cause. But actually, MDA can help investigators and prosecutors to achieve the highest level on that pyramid. How this works in practice? The first level of our pyramid is reasonable suspicion. So there is no checkpoint at sea. So naturally, from a mere defense perspective, if we have a threat in our territory, we are allowed to react to that threat. But when we are bringing a criminal case to the court of law, the act of intercepting a vessel, that will be challenged, not only from a jurisdictional perspective, but also from a reasons perspective. Like a boarding officer that is explaining why they arrested that crew, they have to explain what made you suspect from that vessel. It is easy for people, common people, to understand when we say that someone walking at noon in Dhaka using a heavy jacket is acting, the person is acting suspiciously. So he might be concealing something. But in the maritime domain, investigators and prosecutors, they don't know these hints. They don't know this hunch. So maritime domain awareness can help them also understand why the vessel was suspected suspiciously. So I brought you here an example from a little bit old times. I think the other cases were more recent. Before joining UNODC, I was working for Interpol Maritime Crime Subdirectorate, and as part of my work, I was supporting law enforcement investigators and prosecutors to investigate high-profile maritime crime cases. The case I'm bringing here today is a piracy case that happens at the peak of the piracy crisis in the Gulf of Guinea. And what Interpol was doing is that essentially, upon receiving an alert from about a piracy incident, we started to look for suspicious behavior that could be linked to that piracy attack, to that piracy incident. So you can see here on the left side of the screen, that vessel was identified just following a pirate attack out of Gabon. And why is this interesting? You can see the pattern of movement of that vessel. It was going along the shoreline through multiple jurisdictions in West Africa, and then suddenly it took south towards Gabon. What is interesting here, because this is a tugboat, it was a tugboat. So despite all the AIS gaps it had and all the risk indicators that matched Interpol profile of risk indicators for mother vessels involved in piracy attacks, that can be a little bit unusual for a tugboat to behave that way. On the other side is the pattern of movements of a tugboat that I took from Chateauguay. So you can see it's completely different. Okay? There might be a legitimate reason why this tugboat was behaving like that. Maybe it was bringing a barge across multiple jurisdictions. There might be a reason, yes. But that's enough to explain lawfully an inspection. It's suspicious. So that gives ground after in the court of law to explain why that vessel was inspected. Okay? There were several other risk indicators involved in this vessel. Okay? Not only this one. Then things comes more interesting. I said that the vessel went south. And you can see what happened here is that this vessel turned off its AIS 56 nautical miles away from where the merchant vessel that was attacked by pirates disappeared, okay, went dark. So the tugboat turned off its AIS 56 nautical miles, 20 hours before the pirate attack. Now we are going even higher in the burden of proof standards pyramid. So we are talking before about reasonable suspicion. Now we could say that we have probable cause. That will give legal grounds for the state to bring its action to another level as well. For example, it can justify search, it can justify preliminary investigations against that vessel, legally speaking. And further to that, this tugboat, it was based on this analysis, it was intercepted eventually by one of the navies in the region, okay? And they exchanged this picture. The picture below was sent by the Navy, and that one is a picture. The picture above was taken before the pirate attack. And you can see here that in the second picture, there is a crane on top of the tugboat. That's also a little bit suspicious because that's not standard equipment for a tugboat, right? That gives investigators a lead. Based on this information, just because we received this picture from the Navy, we continued tracing the movements of the tugboat, and we identified that before. That's what this map is a little bit small. That's what this map is showing here. We could identify that this tugboat was for a month in a small shipyard in Lagos, Nigeria. So Nigeria at that time, unfortunately, was the birth of the piracy in that region. So we suspect that this boat was there to install this crane, and the crane was used to put the pirate skiff up and down the tugboat. So the tugboat's not very practical to intercept a big merchant vessel, but it's good because it's strong and can navigate very long. So you can use it as a mother vessel, but also it's not fast enough to intercept. So the tugboat was supposedly used as a mother vessel, and the crane was utilized to put the skiff on board and off board. Okay, this pattern here that I showed before, we had good indications to believe that they were not doing tug operations. What they were doing here, they were smuggling fuel, because smuggling fuel in Nigeria is a big thing. So basically they were bringing, that took place over a year. So they were bringing fuel from Nigeria and bringing to other jurisdiction. So all of that was done essentially by an analyst and a criminal investigator in Lyon, only using maritime domain awareness generated evidence. So we have now several leads for investigations to go after. For example, if we are able to go to that shipyard and we can prove that the crane was paid with a credit card, and we can link to that credit card to a bank account, now we can maybe identify who are the organizers of that piracy attack, because someone paid for that crane, and that's not cheap. So someone invested money to perform that pirate attack. Okay. My time is up, but very briefly, very briefly. There is another case that was interesting, because this case here, we are talking about support to investigations, improving culpability. But there was an interesting case that is much more recent, and it happened in France. That's the Guardian's case. That was the first time in France that culpability, so we achieved conviction on maritime pollution only using MDA-generated evidence. So this vessel, the Guardians, it released oil pollution in the territorial waters of France. But when it was intercepted, when it was inspected, it was not anymore there. That was times later. It was some time later. Right? So using a machine learning technology, basically using profile and crossing AIS data with satellite pictures of the oil spill and pattern behavior, the court of law in Rouen, the court of appeal, they found guilty the captain and the owner of the vessel without actual humane confirmation inspection of that vessel. So it's really an emerging jurisprudence on use of MDA-generated evidence. There are some key considerations, however, to the use of MDA-generated evidence to achieve legal finish. I talk about the standards of proof in a criminal case. So they are very high, they are much stringent. So it's not only about generating evidence and acting upon the evidence. So there are some standards on how this evidence needs to be validated and treated to be admitted in the court of law. So it needs to be authentic, it needs to be genuine, and it needs to be reliable, for example. In this way, reporting is extremely important. What happened is that in Information Fusion Center, Maritime Operations Center, operators usually they don't have a law enforcement perspective. So they have a much more defense perspective. So the way they report the information they collect through MDA platforms is not actually to ensure culpability. It's to inform action, so actionable intelligence. Okay? And to this effect, multi-agency information fusion centers can be a very powerful tool, because we are putting together law enforcement and other expertise together with naval expertise as well. So it's complementary. That creates checks and balance. For example, if a judge or a court, they know that one analytical report, such as more or less what I showed here, has been validated by multiple agencies. For example, if the Department of Environment is signing an analytical report on marine pollution, that gives a lot of legal grounds to that report. That gives much more strength to that report, okay? And that's why the UNODC has been engaging and working together with the IFCs in the region.
Felipe,
so IFC Sri Lanka, that's my last slide. The IFC Sri Lanka, the Maritime Information Assessment Department Maldives, and IFC Bangladesh, IFC IOR. And finally, I would like to congratulate the Bangladesh Navy for the initiative to starting the Information Fuel Center in Bangladesh. Please rest assured that UNODC is also happy to support the IFC as much as to the extent of our capabilities. Thank you.
thank you. Thank you, Philip, for another very substantive presentation, bringing to us the legal complexities of not only apprehending criminals, but also bringing them to justice. Very vast subjects, and our panelists were really challenged for time. But since we have a lot of other issues on the agenda, we need to complete this session on time. So I think we will take a couple of questions, just to see if anybody needs any clarification. So if anybody wants to speak, please keep your interventions very short, and please identify yourself. Thank you. A gentleman in the middle.
Is John still with us? He's
still with us, yes.
He's still with us. He
Very much so.
Okay, Anthony Bergen's my name, John. I'm from the Australian National University in Canberra. My question, and thank you for your presentation, it was fascinating, relates to this new term that's being used, dark shipping. That is, vessels trying to hide their identity, etc. I mean, do your, how do I put it, your responsible ship owning associations, are they doing as much as they can to try and control and bring to authorities notice the activities of these so-called dark ships?
So this is a tricky. Sorry, thank you, Ambassador. This is a tricky question to answer because there's several different types of what are termed dark ship. So there's sanctions busting ships, which are in breach of international sanctions, and obviously we would work with authorities to ensure that none of our members' vessels are involved in that sort of activity. But then what is commonly referred to as the dark fleet is essentially shipping Russian oil, and that's not illegal internationally. So that presents huge problems for the shipping industry, because in fact, if you're shipping Russia from, shipping oil from Russia to India, let's say, there's nothing in and of itself that's illegal about that. So we have to be careful when we approach this issue. What I can say is that we're very concerned about substandard shipping, and we're working with the IMO to combat that. And we are very, very mindful of the sanctions busters internationally, and also the phenomenon of false flagging, which is very, very new and is very, very problematic, particularly if there's an incident, because there's no guarantee that that's insured. So it's a big problem, and it's very, very complicated. We do work to combat it, but what I would close with is, unfortunately, I don't think it's going away anytime soon.
Any other questions? Gentleman on the left.
Thank you. So my question is for Ramos. Ramos, when you are giving your optimistic views regarding the legal finish, at that time, it's my personal view, at that time we are seeing on the West, there is some clash on the Venezuelan so-called drug carrying boats by the US side. And also on our East, we can see that China is trying to establish their new order of maritime order, I should say, through gray zone activities. So in that perspective, how you envision the future legal finish, how much it will be prospectful in this case? Thank you.
Yeah, the international legal framework, international domain, things get much more complicated, especially when interests clash. So what I was talking before, it's for countries that have a common interest. I think fighting drug trafficking or fight piracy is a common interest. So it gets much easier. But when we are talking about countries with different interest, it gets much more complicated. International law is complicated by nature. It's not necessarily binding. Not all countries need to sign. For example, UN clause not signed by some countries. So it's difficult to enforce. So how I see the future, I see it optimistically, and the reason is why economic interest always drive cooperation. So I think to the extent that countries, the maritime industry is always growing. So the economic interest will help countries cooperate better and establish better international legal frameworks hitherto, in my opinion.
Okay, I'm very sorry I cannot take any more questions. We have run out of time. So I would like to thank our two very distinguished panelists for their substantive and very informative presentations, and all of you participants for your attention. This is a very important subject, and for Bangladesh, I think our stakeholders need to understand that, are still trying to understand what's expected of us from maritime domain awareness and what are the benefits we will get from it. But one thing as a layman I understand is there is much more need to expand the awareness of MDA. And there needs to be much more dialogue and discussion, not only among the technical experts, but among the lay people also, among the civilians or among the regular people who are also plying the maritime zone or the oceans. So thank you all very much. Thank you ANU, and thank you to the organizers. Good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John, coming in there virtually. Apologies, we had to pull you up. We're just on a very, very tight schedule.